Most men think attraction is all about looks or money, but what if I told you that some of the most irresistible traits are silent, subtle, and completely effortless? These aren't tricks. These are quiet behaviors that speak louder than words, and trust me, women notice every single one. Emotional discipline is one of the most underrated yet deeply powerful qualities a man can possess, especially in the eyes of a woman. It's not about being cold, emotionless, or unavailable. It's the ability to manage your internal state regardless of what's happening externally. In simple terms, it's about keeping your center, even when everything around you is trying to pull you off balance. Emotional discipline communicates strength, leadership, maturity, and trustworthiness, all without you having to say a single word. Women pick up on this immediately. Why? Because the world is chaotic, unpredictable, and emotionally draining. A man who remains grounded and steady becomes her safe space, and that's attractive in a way that goes far deeper than looks or charm ever could. Imagine this. You're out on a date, and the conversation turns a little awkward. She challenges something you say, not rudely, but in a way that catches you off guard. Most men, in that moment, will either become defensive, shut down, or try too hard to explain themselves. They become reactive, but a man with emotional discipline doesn't flinch. He breathes, he pauses, he smiles slightly, and either asks her to explain her point of view or simply continues without letting that moment rattle him. That's the kind of man who doesn't have to prove anything because he knows who he is. That calm response, that ability to not take things personally, sends a very loud signal to her. This man is in control, not of me, but of himself. That's what makes it so powerful. Women are constantly scanning for emotional safety, whether consciously or not. They want to know if the man they're interacting with can handle pressure. Can you take criticism without becoming aggressive? Can you be challenged without shutting down? Can you stay composed when things don't go your way? Emotional discipline answers all of those questions with a quiet, firm yes. Think about the way a man acts in traffic when someone cuts him off. The one who screams, curses, and bangs the steering wheel might think he's just blowing off steam, but what a woman sees is instability, volatility, and a lack of self-control. On the other hand, the man who tightens his grip slightly, exhales, and moves on, she sees strength, she sees restraint, she sees composure. That's a man who can handle life, and by extension, can handle her emotions too. Let's take another example. Imagine a woman opens up about something deeply personal. Maybe she's feeling overwhelmed with work, insecure about her appearance, or anxious about something she did in her past. Most men will either try to fix the issue or dismiss it in an attempt to lighten the mood. Emotional discipline means resisting both. You don't rush to solutions. You don't make jokes to dodge the discomfort. You sit with it. You stay present. You don't let her emotions trigger you into action. And that kind of stillness, that emotional anchoring, is something that very few men possess. It creates space for her to feel safe, to feel heard, and to trust you, not because of what you say, but because of what you don't do. In conflict, emotional discipline becomes even more visible. Arguments are inevitable. Disagreements will happen, but a man with discipline doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't throw insults or play emotional games. He listens, he speaks with intention, and if needed, he's even willing to walk away, not to punish her, but to protect his peace. He's not emotionally hijacked. He knows how to regulate himself. That kind of power is incredibly attractive to a woman because it means she won't have to walk on eggshells around him. She doesn't have to worry about triggering a storm. She can relax into her own feminine energy because his masculine energy is stable, consistent, and unshakable. There's also a quiet confidence that comes from emotional discipline. It shows up in the way you make decisions, the way you navigate stress, the way you handle people who try to provoke you. For example, Let's say you're at a party and another guy makes a passive-aggressive remark about you in front of others. Maybe he's trying to be funny or get under your skin. The reactive man gets loud, tries to win the moment with a comeback, or worse, becomes hostile. The emotionally disciplined man? He lets the comment hang in the air, smiles knowingly, and redirects the conversation with grace. He doesn't need to defend himself. His presence is already doing that. That silent, grounded self-assurance, it shakes people, and it draws women in like a magnet. What most men don't realize is that emotional discipline doesn't just make you attractive, it makes you unforgettable. Long after the conversation ends or the moment passes, a woman will remember how you made her feel. Did she feel anxious around you? Did she feel judged? Or did she feel like she could exhale, finally, around a man who didn't need to dominate, impress, or overreact? Emotional discipline creates that feeling of safety, of steadiness. It turns a man into a rock in a world full of emotional waves, and in that stillness, in that inner control, women find themselves drawn in, sometimes without even knowing why. Intentional silence is one of the most misunderstood, yet incredibly magnetic traits a man can possess. In a world that rewards noise, quick responses, and constant verbal validation, silence, when used deliberately, stands out. It's a form of presence that doesn't need explanation. It's not about being shy, awkward, or passive. It's about creating space. A space that invites curiosity, attention, and emotional connection. When a man embraces intentional silence, he communicates depth, confidence, and power. Women don't just hear his words, they feel his energy. He doesn't speak to impress. He speaks because there's something worth saying. And when there isn't, he's comfortable simply being, fully, unapologetically, and silently present. Think about the last time you were around someone who didn't feel the need to fill every gap in conversation. That kind of presence is rare. Most people panic at the first sign of silence, rushing to fill it with small talk, nervous laughter, or pointless commentary. But a man who holds his silence, who pauses before he speaks, who allows space to breathe in a conversation, that man radiates a mysterious self-assuredness. He gives off the impression that he's listening, processing, thinking, and that is far more attractive than someone who is just waiting for their turn to speak. Women instinctively feel more seen, heard, and understood in the company of such a man, because intentional silence gives her permission to open up without fear of being interrupted or judged. Let's take a practical example. Imagine you're on a date, and the woman you're with shares something personal, maybe a past experience or a challenge she's facing. Most men immediately jump in with advice, validation, or a joke to lighten the moment. But the man who practices intentional silence does something different. He listens carefully, nods slightly, and instead of responding right away, he allows a pause. A soft, calm, deliberate pause. He's not being distant. He's giving weight to what she just said. That moment of stillness tells her that her words mattered, that he's not formulating a quick-fix answer or trying to steer the conversation back to himself. He's sitting with it. That pause alone is powerful. It deepens emotional trust, it shows maturity, and more importantly, it creates emotional gravity, drawing her in, making her feel safe and understood. Another aspect of intentional silence is how it plays out in moments of tension. Conflict is inevitable. Whether it's a misunderstanding, a disagreement, or a heated conversation, how a man handles silence during those moments speaks volumes about his self-control. A reactive man will raise his voice, talk over her, or defend himself impulsively. But the man who uses intentional silence allows the storm to pass before he speaks. He lets her vent, he lets the emotion peak. And when it's time to speak, he does so calmly, with clarity and purpose. That kind of composure is incredibly rare and speaks to a man's inner strength. It says, "I am not afraid of your emotions. I'm not intimidated by discomfort. I can hold space for it without losing myself. Women may not articulate it in these words, but they feel the difference deeply. There's also a certain elegance to intentional silence when it comes to body language and unspoken communication. When a man walks into a room, he doesn't need to announce himself. His energy does it for him. He doesn't fidget. He doesn't dominate conversations with loud opinions. Instead, he observes. He listens. He responds with deliberate words and relaxed posture. He makes steady eye contact, not to intimidate, but to connect. That kind of quiet control is intoxicating to women. It signals emotional intelligence, restraint, and a mind that doesn't need external validation. He lets others talk first. He doesn't interrupt. And when he does speak, people naturally lean in, not because he's loud, but because his silence has already demanded attention. In romantic dynamics, intentional silence often creates what some call pull energy. Instead of pushing his energy onto a woman by constantly complimenting her, entertaining her, or seeking her approval, he holds back. Not in a manipulative way, but in a grounded, present way. His silence invites her into his world, rather than projecting himself into hers. This pull energy makes women want to know more, feel more, experience more, because in the absence of constant talking, there is curiosity. She begins to wonder what he's thinking, what his story is, what he'll say next. And in that wondering, attraction quietly builds. Even in flirtation, intentional silence can be incredibly powerful. Imagine a moment where you lock eyes with a woman across the table. Instead of immediately breaking eye contact or rushing to say something clever, you hold it for a few extra seconds. You smile slightly, and then you look away, calmly. That moment says more than a paragraph ever could. It creates tension, the good kind, the kind that leaves an impression. It's a message that says, I see you, I'm aware of you, and I'm completely comfortable with this moment. That kind of silence is electric. It doesn't need explanation. It lingers, and she'll remember it long after the conversation ends. Intentional silence is not just about holding your tongue. It's about creating emotional space. It's about showing that you're not afraid of pauses, that you're comfortable in your own skin, and that you don't need to constantly perform to be valuable. In doing so, you stand apart. Because in a world that's always rushing, always talking, always proving, silence becomes a kind of power that only the grounded, secure, and self-aware man knows how to wield. And women, they notice, not because you're loud, but because your silence makes them feel something that most noise never could. Controlled eye contact is one of the most subtly powerful tools a man can use to create connection, command respect, and ignite attraction without saying a single word. It's often underestimated, or worse, misused by men who don't understand the delicate balance between confidence and intimidation. True controlled eye contact isn't about staring someone down or trying to dominate a room with your gaze. It's about knowing when to look, how long to hold it, and why it matters. It's about presence, emotional awareness, and the ability to read and shape the energy between you and another person, especially a woman. In the hands of a self-aware man, eye contact becomes a magnetic signal. It says, I see you, I'm here, I'm not afraid of being seen. When a man holds intentional, measured eye contact, it tells a woman several things instantly: that he's confident in himself, that he's not seeking approval, and that he's engaged, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. It creates a moment of focus in a world filled with distractions. But this kind of eye contact requires emotional composure. Because to hold someone's gaze without flinching, especially when feelings of desire, nervousness, or vulnerability are involved, takes far more strength than most men realize. Controlled eye contact is the unspoken expression of internal calm. It signals that a man is centered, that he's aware of his surroundings and emotions, but not controlled by them. Imagine sitting across from a woman on a first date. The conversation is flowing, and you ask her a meaningful question, not a surface-level one, but something that requires a moment of thought. Instead of looking away while she answers, checking your phone, or fidgeting with your drink, you maintain steady eye contact. Not the intense, predatory kind, but a calm, slightly softened gaze that tells her you're listening, you're present, and you're absorbing what she says. That small act changes the entire dynamic. She feels seen, not judged, not analyzed. Seen, and that feeling is rare. In that moment, your eyes are saying, "You have my full attention." And for many women who are so used to being half listened to, that attention alone can spark connection. There's also an element of control involved. You are not staring her down. You're not trying to burn through her defenses with a fixed, intense look. Controlled eye contact is about knowing when to soften your gaze, when to hold it steady, and when to look away. The act of breaking eye contact, when done with intention, can be just as powerful as holding it. For instance, imagine you've just made a slightly flirtatious comment, one that carries a bit of double meaning. You say it with a small smirk, holding eye contact for just a second longer than usual, and then you slowly look away, letting the silence do the rest. That controlled break in eye contact builds anticipation. It leaves space for her imagination to wander. It sends the message that you're comfortable with tension, and that you know how to create it and sit in it without needing constant affirmation. Controlled eye contact also sets boundaries. If someone crosses a line, whether it's with disrespect, flirtation, or manipulation, your eyes can respond without a single word. A longer, unbroken gaze with slightly narrowed eyes can say, "That's not okay." A quick upward glance followed by silence can signal, "You're not worth reacting to." It communicates confidence, self-respect, and emotional steadiness. In the same way, a soft gaze held during a moment of vulnerability shows empathy and safety. The ability to adjust your eye contact based on the context, the person, and the emotion demonstrates deep emotional intelligence. There's also an undeniable allure that comes from a man who doesn't break eye contact the moment things become emotionally charged. When a woman is sharing something emotional or revealing a part of herself that feels raw, many men instinctively look away. Not out of disrespect, but because it's uncomfortable. Holding that eye contact in those moments is not about invading her space. It's about standing still while she brings her emotion forward. It's about being grounded enough in yourself that you don't need to retreat. That presence, expressed entirely through your gaze, makes her feel emotionally held. It shows that you're not just physically there, you're with her in that moment. That depth of presence builds trust and intimacy in ways that compliments and grand gestures never could. Even in non-romantic settings, controlled eye contact is the unspoken language of leadership. When you speak to a group, you don't dart your eyes around the room nervously. You land your gaze, intentionally, on one person at a time, hold it just long enough to connect, and then move on. When you enter a room and lock eyes briefly with someone who acknowledges you, you nod subtly before looking away. These small acts communicate dominance without aggression, confidence without arrogance. And the man who can wield eye contact this way never has to raise his voice or boast about who he is. People feel it when they look at him. His silence, paired with that gaze, becomes enough. Purpose-driven movements are an often overlooked signal of high-value masculinity. Most men go through life unaware of the subtle messages their body language sends. Every movement, every step, every hand gesture either communicates calm, clarity, and confidence, or reveals insecurity, restlessness, and self-doubt. Purpose-driven movement is not about walking slowly or being robotic. It's about intention. It's about understanding that your body language is a visual language, one women read fluently, and when your actions match the energy of a man who knows exactly what he's doing and why, it creates an unspoken sense of security, control, and attraction. This kind of movement doesn't demand attention, it commands it. A man with purpose in his motion doesn't need to rush, fidget, or seek approval through exaggerated gestures. He moves with quiet certainty, and that presence alone creates a gravitational pull. Think about how most men behave in public spaces. Many walk too fast as if they're trying to escape the moment. Others constantly shift their weight, tap their feet, or touch their faces. Their eyes scan nervously, their hands flutter without control, and they seem like they're always anticipating something. Women notice this because it suggests a lack of grounding. But a man who is purpose-driven in his movements sends a completely different message. He enters a room with deliberate steps. He stands without swaying. His posture is relaxed but upright, shoulders back, chin slightly raised, eyes forward. Every gesture, every pause, every shift in his body is subtle but deliberate. He doesn't perform for the room. He belongs in the room. That's the difference. And that difference makes him magnetic without saying a word. Purpose-driven movement also shows up in the small things, reaching for your glass during a conversation without looking down at it, turning your head slowly to respond instead of jerking in reaction, standing up from a chair with measured control rather than rushing. It even shows in the way you adjust your sleeves, walk across a room, or place your phone on the table. These micro movements are always being noticed. A woman watching you isn't necessarily focused on the act itself, but on what the act suggests. Do your actions reflect presence or distraction, control or anxiety, self-assurance or nervous energy? Men who move with purpose tend to appear more grounded, more in control of themselves, and by extension, more in control of their environment. Let's look at an example. You're at a cafe and a woman nearby catches your eye. Most men, if they muster the courage to approach, will stumble through the motion. Quick, jittery steps, overthinking their posture, adjusting their clothes mid-stride, possibly even rehearsing their opening line in their head. But a purpose-driven man does something different. He waits, not hesitating, but observing. He watches the moment. He notices if she's occupied, if she's open to conversation. And when he decides to move, he stands fluidly, takes a calm breath, and walks to her table with a relaxed, composed posture. His hands aren't in his pockets. He doesn't stare at the floor. He's not in a hurry. When he speaks, he doesn't lean forward too quickly. He holds his ground, meets her gaze, and speaks in a steady tone. His movements have rhythm. They're not mechanical, they're his. That kind of approach, even if simple in content, feels different to a woman. It doesn't feel like a performance, it feels like a presence entering her space. Even in moments of nonverbal interaction, purpose-driven movement can create deep emotional impact. For instance, imagine sitting next to a woman you've been seeing for a while. The moment feels right. You don't speak. You simply reach out and gently move a strand of hair from her face. You don't rush, you don't fumble, you don't overthink. Your hand moves slowly, deliberately, like you're aware of exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. That single purpose-driven gesture can carry more emotional weight than any compliment or pickup line. It conveys care, focus, and masculine presence in one simple motion. And what matters is that you're not trying to impress. Your body is just following the clarity of your intent. Purpose also shows in how you handle discomfort or conflict. Let's say you're having a difficult conversation. A woman brings up something emotional or challenges you on something. A man without control starts gesturing rapidly, scratching his head, clenching his jaw, crossing and uncrossing his arms. But a man grounded in purpose slows down. He leans back slightly. He takes a breath. He doesn't speak immediately. When he finally does respond, he does so with gestures that are minimal but expressive. His hands may move to emphasize a point, but they do so smoothly, not erratically. His posture doesn't collapse. His shoulders remain relaxed. He's not trying to overpower the moment. He's meeting it. That kind of embodiment communicates strength, trustworthiness, and stability, all of which register deeply with women, often on an unconscious level. Purpose-driven movement is not about theatrics. It's not about being stiff or overly calculated. It's about letting your body reflect the same clarity and confidence that lives inside your mind. When a man knows who he is, he doesn't move with excess. He doesn't fidget, flinch, or try to win the room over with performative energy. He doesn't hide in stillness, nor does he escape in frantic motion. He moves because he chooses to move, not because he's reacting to the environment around him. Women feel that distinction. They feel the intention behind the movement, the calm behind the action, and the confidence behind the silence between gestures. When your body speaks with purpose, women listen, even if they don't consciously know why. Unshakable boundaries are one of the most attractive and powerful traits a man can have, not just in relationships, but in every area of life. Boundaries are not about being rigid, cold, or emotionally unavailable. They are about self-respect. They signal that a man has standards for how he will be treated, what he will accept, and what he will not tolerate, no matter how beautiful, persuasive, or emotionally intense someone else might be. When a man holds unshakable boundaries, women don't see it as harshness. They see it as security, because a man who can say no with calm conviction, who doesn't bend just to avoid conflict, and who holds himself to the same standards he expects from others, is a man who is deeply grounded in his identity. That groundedness is rare and deeply magnetic. In modern dating, many men confuse being agreeable with being attractive. They overextend themselves, agree to things they're uncomfortable with, and allow disrespectful behavior just to avoid tension or keep the peace. But the truth is, every time a man betrays his own boundaries to maintain connection, he teaches the woman in his life that his word isn't final and that his standards are negotiable. Over time, this erodes not only her respect for him, but his own self-respect. On the other hand, a man with unshakable boundaries doesn't fear disconnection because his self-worth isn't tied to whether or not someone stays. He understands that a woman who cannot respect his limits is not someone he should be making space for in the first place, and that quiet, non-reactive firmness creates an aura of self-trust and inner stability that women feel immediately. Let's consider a simple but common example. Imagine you're dating a woman who constantly tests limits. She jokes about your insecurities in front of others, flirts openly with other men, or cancels plans at the last minute without consideration. Most men, in an attempt to not seem too sensitive, would brush it off or laugh along, hoping the behavior stops on its own. But the man with unshakable boundaries calmly addresses it, not with anger, not with begging, but with clear, direct words. He might say, "I'm not okay with being spoken about like that, especially in front of others. If that's something you find funny, I respect that, but it's not something I'll tolerate again." He says it once, he says it clearly, and if the behavior repeats, he doesn't threaten, he acts. Maybe he distances himself, maybe he ends the relationship. Not because he's trying to punish her, but because he doesn't negotiate with disrespect. That level of consistency creates not only respect, but a sense of safety. Women instinctively respect a man who respects himself enough to walk away from anything that doesn't align with his values. Unshakable boundaries also show up in more subtle situations, like emotional manipulation. A woman might give you the silent treatment, use guilt to get her way, or play hot and cold games to keep you chasing her. A man without firm boundaries might internalize this behavior, question what he did wrong, or change himself in the hopes of regaining her approval. But a man rooted in self-worth doesn't play that game. He's aware of emotional dynamics. He doesn't chase someone who withholds affection to control him. He doesn't argue for his value. Instead, he names the pattern calmly and chooses to remove himself from emotionally unsafe dynamics. He doesn't need drama to feel significant. His boundary is not a line in the sand. It's the framework of how he lives, how he loves, and how he protects his peace. Even in physical boundaries, the message is powerful. For example, if a woman tries to push physical intimacy faster than he's comfortable with, the average man might comply, thinking it's what he's supposed to do or fearing rejection if he doesn't. But a man with boundaries holds his pace. He communicates clearly. I want to take my time with this. I value connection more than rushing into something I'm not aligned with. That level of self-command, especially when most men are conditioned to always say yes to intimacy, is not only rare, it's incredibly attractive. It communicates that his body, his time, and his attention are not just available to anyone. They are given with purpose. Boundaries also extend into how a man handles his time and energy. A man who is constantly available, who cancels his own plans to accommodate a woman at the last minute, who says yes to every request out of fear of disappointing someone, loses value, not because kindness is unattractive, but because it lacks self-protection. A man with unshakable boundaries protects his time like he protects his mind. He doesn't entertain last-minute invitations that disregard his schedule. He doesn't answer calls at midnight unless it's urgent. He's not unkind, he's intentional. And women notice this. They respect the man who doesn't need to be rude to be firm, who can say no without guilt and yes without resentment. Because his yes is rare, and in that rarity it becomes meaningful. What makes boundaries so magnetic is that they are not for control, they are for clarity. They show that a man is not controlled by lust, by validation, or by fear of losing someone. He operates from a deeper place, a place of self-respect that guides every decision, every conversation, and every connection. He's not quick to argue. He's not interested in dominating others. He simply knows what he stands for, and he doesn't waver when tested. And women can feel that integrity, not because he talks about it, but because she watches him live it. Listening without fixing is one of the quietest yet most powerful behaviors a man can master if he wants to deepen his emotional connection with women and become undeniably attractive on a deeper, more resonant level. Most men, even with the best intentions, fall into the trap of trying to solve a woman's feelings. She starts talking about her day, her stress, her confusion, and he immediately shifts into problem-solving mode. He offers advice, solutions, strategies, or reasons why she shouldn't feel the way she does. Not because he doesn't care, but because he wants to help. However, what many men don't realize is that this instinct to fix actually communicates the opposite of what they intend. It tells the woman on a subtle emotional level that her feelings are inconvenient, that they need to be corrected, and that he cannot sit in the discomfort of emotion without turning it into a task. But when a man learns to listen without trying to fix, when he can sit with her emotion and hold space for it without shrinking, interrupting, or rationalizing, he becomes rare and deeply magnetic. To listen without fixing is to witness. It's to be fully present, not to take charge of her feelings, but to honor them. Women often speak to process, not to seek solutions. They express emotion to be felt with, not analyzed. When a man listens without needing to jump in with answers, he shows that he is emotionally strong enough to absorb her vulnerability without flinching. He becomes the steady space where her waves can crash, knowing they will not knock him over. That emotional strength, the kind that can remain grounded while someone else releases what's inside them, is incredibly rare. It doesn't require expertise. It doesn't require emotional detachment. It requires presence, calm, and the humility to not make someone else's pain about your ability to fix it. Imagine a woman coming home after a hard day. She's clearly upset, frustrated with her boss, overwhelmed by deadlines, and emotionally drained. She starts venting to her partner. Most men, hearing the tension in her voice, will immediately say something like, "You should just quit," or "Don't let it get to you," or "Why don't you just talk to HR?" The intention behind these words is often loving, but the impact misses the mark. She wasn't looking for a fix. She needed to be seen. She needed to release what was in her body. A man who has mastered the art of listening without fixing would respond differently. He would let her speak without interrupting. He'd make eye contact. He might gently nod, stay quiet, and let her finish every sentence before he responds. And when he does speak, it might be something as simple as, "That sounds exhausting," or "I can hear how much that's weighing on you." Those words don't solve anything, but they validate everything. And in that validation, the emotional tension starts to ease, not because she was given advice, but because she was given presence. What's deeply attractive about this trait is that it demonstrates maturity and emotional discipline. A man who listens without fixing isn't trying to win. He's not trying to prove how useful or intelligent he is. He's simply holding space. That restraint requires self-control. It's easier to interrupt. It's easier to offer quick answers. It's harder to sit in silence and truly hear what someone is saying without immediately responding. Women pick up on this difference almost immediately. They know when a man is reacting to discomfort versus when he's rooted enough in himself to just be there. And that kind of presence builds emotional intimacy in ways no gift, compliment, or date night ever could. Another powerful example is when a woman opens up about her fears or insecurities, especially ones involving the relationship itself. She might say something vulnerable like, "Sometimes I feel like I'm not enough for you," or "I worry that you'll eventually leave me." Most men panic in moments like these. They rush to reassure. They say, "That's not true," or "You're overthinking," or "Don't be silly, I love you." Again, the intention is care, but the effect is invalidation. A man who listens without fixing doesn't rush to erase her fear. Instead, he allows it to exist. He might respond with, "That must be really hard to feel," or "I'm glad you told me that, I hear you." By not rushing to change her mind or emotions, he gives her something far more valuable than reassurance. He gives her the experience of being understood. There is something profoundly calming about a man who can sit in silence, nod slowly, and absorb without interruption. It says, "You don't have to be perfect for me to stay with you right now." That message, communicated not with grand gestures but with the stillness of your attention, creates emotional safety. And emotional safety is one of the rarest and most desired experiences for a woman in a romantic connection. It doesn't just make her feel closer to you, it makes her more relaxed in her own body around you. She doesn't have to perform, hide, or soften her emotions to protect your ego. She can just be. And when she realizes that you don't need her to be in a good mood all the time, when she sees that you can handle the full spectrum of who she is without trying to shrink it down into something manageable for you, she begins to trust you in a different way. That trust is what builds emotional depth. It's what makes you unforgettable, not because you said something brilliant, but because you did something rare. You truly listened, and you didn't need to fix a thing. So many men today are chasing attraction in all the wrong ways, trying to impress with noise, with flashy gestures, with overcompensation. But real, lasting attraction, the kind that sinks into a woman's soul, is built through quiet mastery, through behaviors that don't scream for attention, but command it effortlessly. Intentional silence, controlled eye contact, purpose-driven movement, unshakable boundaries, listening without fixing. These aren't tactics. They are reflections of a man who knows who he is. And that kind of man, he doesn't chase validation. He doesn't beg to be seen. He becomes the man who is seen without even trying. So if you're tired of performing, of pretending, of playing games that drain you, remember this: the most powerful form of attraction is stillness. It's being the eye of the storm in a world of chaos. Because when a woman meets a man who doesn't need to prove himself, who leads without force, who listens without fixing, who moves with clarity, and who lives by his values no matter who's watching, she knows she's in the presence of a man unlike any she's ever met before. Become that man, quietly, powerfully, unshakably.